Sharon Dixon Wall, and I'm honored to be the Norman Howard School's ex officio ambassador to the Eastern Caribbean Islands. This is our first international outreach, and through it, we hope to establish a relationship which will allow us to share our knowledge, experience, and resources with island educators grades 5 through 12. Understanding students who do not learn in traditional ways is the theme of this second video in our series on the Norman Howard School's international outreach. We first learned about the students who attend Norman Howard from Director Rosemary Hodges.
We currently have 110 students in grades 5 through 12, and they come from over 30 different school districts, over 9 counties. And all of the students who come here have, of course, areas of strength, but they also have areas of need. So many of our students struggle to read. They might struggle to produce math at their grade level. They might struggle with written expression, but it's all about learning. Because they struggle to learn or they struggle to pay attention, sometimes their behavior might get in the way, not because they really are a behavioral problem, but they just are not able to stay in tune with what's happening in the classroom. They might be impulsive, they might blurt out things, they might do something that is maybe not expected within the classroom. They may not pay attention when teachers are giving directions, so everyone else has started and they don't quite know what they're supposed to do. So there are a lot of things that contribute to struggling within the classroom.
Norman Howard School's speech and language pathologist, Katie McKenzie, provided more in-depth information about the different categories of learning disabilities.
So kids who are coming to school who are affected by brains that tend to be hyperactive or with attention deficit disorder, they really have trouble tuning into their learning and tuning into the teacher and participating in class discussions. They often, as a result of not attending, will not remember the information, so it's very difficult for them to complete assignments. And then in addition to that, they often will present with challenges in their social thinking. So we know that kids with a lot of different diagnoses come to us where they are not really meshing with the social world, and part of that is they're not really attending to what's going on around them, and so a lot of the things they do are considered unexpected for the situation. And so people kind of these students often come to the table and feel like no one likes them, or but really there are some things happening where they're not reading the context of a situation, and so what they're doing is kind of causing them problems. So the autism spectrum kind of refers to a population of kiddos who are neurologically born to brains that are not in tune with what's going on around them as it relates to people. They tend to be more focused on objects or things. But this occurs, as you said, on a spectrum. So at the very far end of the autism spectrum, you have kids that may be nonverbal. They may have deficits cognitively, all the way up to kids who have brilliant minds in certain areas. Their science smarts, for example, may surpass their peers and even adults in their world. Their smarts in one area is not reflected in terms of their social cognitive competencies. So what we're looking for them to be able to do in engaging in the social world, they have a really hard time with that. So Asperger's is a diagnosis that's given to students who are at the very highest functioning end of the autism spectrum. Some of them are even hyperlexic, which means that they are reading at levels that are much farther above their their age level. We know that the way we take in the world around us, the sensory system, and the way we integrate all of that affects our behavior. And if a child is really having a hard time with loud noises or texture or whatever the case may be, their brain space, there's not enough of it to go, for learning. So it gets in the way of their ability to learn. It gets in the way of their ability to interact with other people. Right. So imagine if you were in a classroom and the air conditioning, that noise was like all you could really attend to. Yeah. Because that was your sensory system is just locking you into that. Yeah. It makes it pretty hard to attend to the teacher and to interpret what they're talking about, problem solve all that, and even respond. So, we have to take all that into account. Their sensory system really affects their learning. Then, if they're, for example, in a classroom and their auditory system is really hyper-focused on that noise that the radiator is making, and then the teacher calls on them and they have no idea what the answer is, now you're involving their emotional well-being, right? So now they're feeling bad about themselves because they didn't know the answer, and the teacher's frustrated because they didn't know the answer. So it all weaves together to create this profile of kids that have learning challenges but really do want to learn.
Regional studies have shown that anywhere from 8 to 20% of the general population has some form of a learning disability. Students with learning disabilities cannot process information in the ways that most of us do, and so they often get labeled by their peers as dumb or stupid and judged by teachers as lazy. When compared to students who do not have learning disabilities, LD students are more likely to be bullied at school and abused or maltreated at home. By the time they enter high school, too many underperforming students have already accepted a malignant concept of themselves, and with it comes a deep sense of shame. For some LD students, figuring out who they are and who they want to be becomes overwhelmingly depressing, and so too many of them turn to drugs or alcohol or mischief. Youths with learning disabilities are overrepresented in the juvenile justice system. They also tend to enter the system at a younger age and commit more serious offenses than their non-LD counterparts. Over the years, educators such as those who founded the Norman Howard School began to realize that not only can their underperforming students learn to process information, they often do it in very creative ways. Today's cutting-edge educators, like those at Norman Howard, have learned how to tap into the strengths of their underperforming students, and in so doing, they have revolutionized their students' educational experience. Meet Dr. Sheldon Horowitz of the National Center for Learning Disabilities. In his video, Pockets of Strength, he introduces us to the concept of neurodiversity. It's a fancy word that simply means not all brains are wired in the same way. The brains of students who are challenged by traditional teaching methods do not look like the brains of students who are not. Neurodiversity allows us to think of the brain as consisting of patterns of strengths, which can change from situation to situation. How well an individual performs depends on the presence or absence of the strengths called for in the situation they are in. For example, those who do not perform well in reading or writing may be gifted in the visual arts or in music. Dr. Horowitz looks at the 4 major groups of learning patterns through the lens of neurodiversity in a way that is not disorder-focused. Dyslexia is the first of 4 groups of LD categories he addresses. Dyslexic students struggle with reading, but they have an acute, highly honed sense of the three-dimensional world around them. The skills they need to be successful are not mapped onto the language part of their brain as much as on the visual spatial part, which is the primary domain through which they perceive the world and process information. And they are very good at discerning the details of that domain. They are also often able to get the big picture and see the linkages between one idea and another without having to demonstrate competence in each individual idea. Individuals with ADHD or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder are often celebrated as being out-of-the-box thinkers. They are the risk takers, the adventurers, and the game changers. They are very original in the way they understand and put things together, and by virtue of their ADHD, when something catches their interest, they can be doggedly persistent to the point where they ignore everything else. They may flip back and forth between distraction and being hyper-focused, but when they get hold of a consuming idea, they can stick with it until they bring about their desired outcome. One of the strengths of individuals with Asperger's syndrome and/or nonverbal learning disorders is the ability to focus on detail, and they have great memories for certain kinds of detail. They are very logical thinkers who do not get distracted by the emotional aspects surrounding the tasks they are focused on or the details they deem unimportant. When they undertake or focus on a task, they tend not to let the emotional aspects or peripheral details of that task distract them or get in the way of what they are trying to do. They are often diligent in their undertakings and can work successfully for long periods of time without a lot of direct supervision. When we think about the neurodiverse characteristics of the autism spectrum disorder, we find that they're often able to look at an object and hone right in on its function. How does this thing work in relation to me, and what is it supposed to do? How might it function differently or better? In any task they undertake, they tend to be very persistent and solution-oriented because they are wanting to get something for themselves or wanting to get from point A to point B to benefit the situation they are in. Often what they do, how they make judgments or behave, isn't clouded by convention or emotions. Dr. Horowitz ends with the questions we should be asking ourselves. What is different about the type of order that they use to filter and understand the world around them? And the kinds of questions that we can help them understand are, who am I as a person and as a learner? How can I engage in meaningful ways with my peers and with adults? And how can I contribute meaningfully to the larger society around me? And these are precisely the questions which inform every aspect of the Norman Howard School. It truly is an holistic learning environment.
I think here at Norman Howard, we're really focused on, like, this is your brain. This is how your brain works. We want to really work on kids having a good understanding of how their brain works, how, what are their thinking quirks, what are their, work production quirks. We talk about, none of it's good or bad. It just is. Yeah. And so let's figure out ways to make it work for you. You're the boss of your brain.